Thank you, friends, for coming today. I'm Susan Hoskins from this meeting, Newtown meeting, and we're doing a monthly series on aging well, and this one is on family caregiving. Rosalind Carter once said, there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers.
Right.
So I think most of us can identify with at least one of those, if not several.
Yeah.
What I want to do today is to give some presentation on family caregiving and what's going on there, and then to open it up for questions. We're videotaping the presentation part. When we get to asking questions and, what should I do in this situation, we'll turn off the video and feel free to ask questions that will then be anonymous. Family caregiving is checking on a neighbor, friend, or family member, shopping, doing errands, laundry, housekeeping, taking care of bills and paperwork, managing health care, appointments and medications, providing personal care, including things like showering and dressing, and providing 24-hour supervision. So as you can see, the task of caregiving often grows with time. It may start out being, hey, can I pick up groceries for you once every couple of weeks? And then as a person's abilities diminish, you end up doing more and more. If I don't talk about it, make sure I talk about caregiver creep, because that's a term I've coined to describe that process, and I think it's really critical to understanding what happens when you're a caregiver. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm going to let you digest what a critical issue caregiving, and here I'm talking about family caregivers, people who are providing unpaid care for family members, often because the person can't afford to pay for care, but also because again, caregiver creep. It started out just being, hey, I'm on my way over, can I stop at the store and pick up anything for you? And then it builds and builds. But as we look at a major increase in the number of people who are aging into their 80s and 90s in our country, the need for family caregivers is also only going to grow. And simultaneously, we have fewer young people and fewer immigrants in this country who are our primary pool of paid caregivers. It's going to get challenging. Caregiving, the average length of time that a person is a caregiver is 4 years, averaging 24 and a half hours a week. More if it's for a spouse, as I know some of you have experienced. And when they did this research, the queuing was not counted. So by queuing, I'm talking about, don't forget to take your medication. Don't forget to let the cat in before you go to bed tonight. It's all those little cues that we give to somebody. Did you have your breakfast this morning? And some of us are doing that by phone call. Mom, did you take your medicine? Some of us are doing it when we're living with a person, and we don't even consciously know that we're doing it, but it's all those things that that person that you're caring for is not doing a reliable job of keeping track of. So all of that time isn't even counted here when we talk about the task. In the field, we talk about IADLs. Independent activities of daily living, and those are things like transportation, shopping, housework. There's an average of 4 of those types of tasks that are done by family caregivers of the 7 that are IADLs. Nursing tasks. So here's one of the tricky ones, and that is if you have a paid caregiver coming in, an aide coming in. That person cannot touch medication. That person can remind a person it's time to take your medication, but is legally not supposed to touch it. So it's often a family member's job to come in once a week, get out all the pill boxes, load them up accurately, and then also to call and remind or to stop by after work and make sure that they're taken. Nursing tasks, again, a lot of family caregivers take on these kinds of tasks without any training in them. And yet, you know, Dad's coming home from the hospital, he's got a catheter. The nurse comes for a few weeks, make sure you know how to do it from there, and then you're on your own. The new CARE Act, which was just passed, is trying to address this. Hopefully it will. Half the people have unpaid outside help, 32% have paid help. This is from a recent AARP survey. Many people, half of the people surveyed felt that they didn't have any choice. So what happens for the family caregiver? And one of the things that I'm really aware of, it certainly was true from my experience, and that was that I was juggling family caregiver responsibilities with my own job, which was a full-time job that usually took me at least 50 hours a week, and raising kids. Fortunately, my kids were pretty well raised by the time things got more serious for my parents, but it's a lot to juggle. And that's what we call the sandwich generation, the people caught in the middle trying to juggle the pieces. The results are anxiety and depression, loss of sleep and energy. I know that that's one of the things that I have really enjoyed in the last year is getting at least 7 hours of sleep at night. That was not happening. Not taking care of one's own health, missing sick visits and well visits, lack of exercise, poor nutrition. Again, these are things, even though I knew all this stuff, I've been lecturing on this stuff for 15 years, I could tell it was happening to me. Getting back into exercise and getting back into eating properly, and not just grabbing something between here and their place. Social isolation, lost work time is big, and it's one of the reasons that we in the field are really trying to get employers on board to understand the need for family leave and for some flexibility for employees who may need to take a 45-minute lunch break instead of a half-hour lunch break because they've got to run over, get mom to the bathroom and back and get her lunch in front of her before you race back to work. That caregiver is probably not doing much for her own lunch. Impact on the whole family and an increase in poor coping responses, drinking more or whatever else you do for self-soothing. One of the things that always frustrated the heck out of me was when I went to conferences on caregiving was that they kept saying, oh, you must take care of yourself. You must take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. The reality is, where's that fit? Mm-hmm. So, get a massage, hire more help. Just isn't practical for many families. 78% of family caregivers are paying out of pocket to cover expenses. That may be travel. I know that some people in this room, certainly some people in this meeting, the people they're caring for are not local. And so you're doing things like, I have a friend who lives in Wisconsin that I grew up with here who flies in every 3 to 4 weeks to take care of her parents for up to a week. Fortunately, she retired from her job 2 years ago, so she's got some of that time, but she and her husband run a farm. It's not, yeah. She's got a sister in Boston and a brother who lives locally, but it's hard work. So the travel expenses, sometimes those things you're picking up at the grocery store, you just add them to your grocery bill, you're not keeping it separate. 40% experience some kind of financial strain. skimping on your own needs. These are the places where people compromise. Again, I don't like reading slides. So long distance caregiving. It's harder to know the real day-to-day. So an example I can give you here, my brother who lives in Washington State would come in to visit my parents once a year and stay for 3 days. And it was great because he would stay with them. And he saw stuff that was going on in the evening or in the course of those 3 days that I wasn't aware of, because my parents were really good at faking it for the hour or two I was there every couple of days. They could look a lot more functional in some areas. So my brother and my sister-in-law were really good at identifying things. You know, Mom was telling me, yeah, we go to dinner every night. My brother was saying, they weren't going to dinner. You know, so I started to pay attention to things like how many bowls of soup were piling up in the refrigerator, or I would check in with their friends and say, have you seen them at dinner recently? But I needed that hint from him. So if you're a long-distance caregiver, here are some suggestions. Look around carefully for dangers or signs of problems. Clutter. We visited Scott's parents once, and every surface in the dining room was piled high with paper, and the bills were mixed in with the junk mail, were mixed in with the newspapers, and just in that particular case, I wanted to find alternate transportation for them. So we go back to, it's harder to know what the resources are. So I called the local senior center to find out whether there was a transportation system in town for seniors. In picking up the phone went beep, beep, beep. And I thought, oh, that means there's a message. I said, when was the last time you checked messages? There's no message machine. Oh, yes, there is. So I dug a little deeper. In this pile of paper, we finally found a telephone bill. On the telephone bill, I discovered that somehow or another they had been signed up for all the services. They had call waiting, they had caller ID, they had voicemail, they had the luxury package. So I called Verizon and I said, well, first they won't talk to me. So I have to put my father-in-law on the phone. Just tell them they can talk to me. So we finally got through that one. And I got them put on the senior rate plan. So they went from something like $80 a month to $15 a month. Mm-hmm. So once again, you know, there went a morning of digging through, sorting through, figuring out ways to be helpful, but looking around. And in that visit, I also went to Scott's oldest sister and said, do you realize that these things are happening? They're not really keeping track of bills. The checkbook just said gift or cash or something. It was a mess. So she actually went to Scott's dad and said, would you like help with this? And was shocked when he said yes. But that was a big turning point. But it was paying attention to those things that I knew to look for. And it's a whole lot easier when it's not your own family, because you want so desperately to see your own family members as competent and capable. So you look around for signs of danger, the clutter, the medications not being taken properly. Does the car have bangs and dents in it that you weren't there the last time? Other repair needs around the house. This is something I've seen in a lot of houses I visit, that a person is just trying so much to maintain themselves that you see the lawn, the garden, the basic maintenance, the front steps, crumbling a little, or a lot. Asking friends and neighbors is a good way to find out more. Asking them about their plans and their resources. Having the conversation. So for those of you who were here last month for our session on planning for end-of-life care, one of the things that we all need to do is to have our advanced directives filled out. But it's not enough to just fill out the paper and shove it in a bottom drawer, because your kids won't know where to find it. You need to take it out and you need to talk with them about it. And whoever you've designated as your proxy really needs to know what you're thinking. And it's hard to have that conversation. A lot of people want to avoid having that conversation, whether it's the parent generation or the children generation or the siblings. Oh, let's not talk about that now. It's Christmas. It's a cheerful time. But you can bring up that conversation by talking about things like, we just went to Uncle Harry's funeral. Uncle Harry had a stroke. Let's talk about what you would want to have happen if you had a stroke. But finding out where your parents, where your family member is keeping those documents and what they wanted is really important. It's for those of you who have gone down this road, how much it helps to know what that person would have chosen if they were capable of making that choice, right? Is so much harder than having to guess in the dark. Making an emergency plan. What if? So I'll use family again as an example. Get a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning. Dad's in the hospital in Oregon. Who's going to go? 3 of the siblings are teachers. The 4th one says, well, I guess it's got to be me. Knowing who's going to go, knowing what the backup plan is. One of the things I work with families on a lot is you don't need to know, mom or dad are fine living in their own home right now, but if something happened, where would you want to go? Do that research now. Find out what care community you might want them to move to, so that if that happens, you're not stuck at 4 o'clock on a Friday talking to a discharge planner on the phone who says, we're discharging in half an hour. Learning about local resources, accompanying the person to a medical visit. So we all know about HIPAA, right? The Healthcare Privacy Act. And you all sign those forms when you go to the doctor that say, well, you actually can talk to anybody you want about me. So there are 2 things that I recommend. One is that everybody, including us, sign a piece of paper, because there really aren't forms for this, that says, I give my physicians permission to talk to the following people about my medical care. Because that's not an automatic, especially if you don't live locally. Especially if the physician has never met you. Now, physicians today are basically assuming that if mom lets you into the appointment with her, that she's given implicit permission to include you in that. But if you call 3 weeks later and you talk to a different person in the practice, you may not get that. And that's usually in an emergency when you really want to know what's going on as quickly as possible. So that's one of the little things I've learned along the way. But it is really good to accompany people. It got to the point with my folks where neither of them could remember between the time they left the doctor's office and the time they got back to their appointment what had actually gone on, who they'd seen, or why. So it became really important, and Scott was fabulous at being the one who attended a lot of those appointments with them. Drive with them. Don't get into that battle of, I'm perfectly fine behind the wheel. It's a little scary, but to say, okay, you drive to meeting this morning. Let's see how that's going. Another thing, and I don't know what the resource is in this area, but where I worked in New Jersey, the St. Lawrence Rehab had a program where they would do a driving evaluation. So the physician doesn't have to make the determination. The physician makes the referral to St. Lawrence for a driving evaluation. It's 2 or 3 hours long. And then that evaluator makes the determination, and if they determine that a person is not safe to drive, they don't give them back their license right then and there. Well, if he had let me drive on familiar roads, I would have been fine. That's what we were worried about. I had one client who used to lose her car weekly. And we just got to the point where we said, we're not going to help you find it. You need to call the police, because we wanted the police to be aware of the fact that this lady was losing her car every week. Then she had a fender bender, and the police took the license. Copy the documents you might need and get online access. Okay, so one of the ways you can help remotely is by managing the bills or overseeing the bills. There's also so much senior fraud and scams going on these days. And, you know, I could give you a list of the ones that are hot this week, and they'll all have disappeared next week, and there'll be new ones. But having access to your parents' bank accounts and investment accounts online is a great way to see whether they're managing their money well or whether someone's taking advantage of them. We'll get into it next month with Lisa when we talk about legal things, but the questions of whether you should be on the bank account, on the account as a signer, on the account as a co-owner, there are recommendations around that, but also whether you legally have access. And I will tell you that my experience recently is that even if you have the financial power of attorney that you filled out with the attorney, some of the major banks and investment houses will not recognize that and want you to fill out their own form. So it's worth double checking that before a person loses competence and can't give you that permission. The bank account question, it's better to be a signer on the account than a co-owner, because if something happens to you, then your parent would end up owing the estate tax for your death. Funny what little things you learn along the way. Connecting with local resources. Every county in the country has a local office on aging, and they're supposed to know what the services are in the area. There's also a profession called geriatric care manager. I recommend, nowadays it's getting kind of soft. There are geriatric care managers who are professionally trained social workers and nurses. There are other people that are crowding into this field, like A Place for Mom, that are not professionally trained. A Place for Moms, I don't mean to trash one company, but let's just say there are companies out there now that will offer to help you with your parents' care, and they don't cost anything, so it sounds like a good deal. But the reason is because they're getting a payment from the facility that they recommend and you select. So you may not get a full list of the places that you have as options, because you're only getting the list of the ones that they rep for, and they may not provide that kind of ongoing care. So once again, going back to dad's in the hospital at 7 o'clock in the morning, what do? My recommendation to the family was hire a local geriatric care manager, because you can call that person and say, hey, we just got a call that dad's in the hospital. Will you go find out what's going on? The care manager could have run over to the hospital, found out that dad, in fact, had left his heart medication at the senior care community he lived in, and figured he could get by for a week at the beach house without it. Turned out not to be true. Once they got him back on his medication, he was fine and nobody had to go. But having someone who's local, who knows the resources, and who also can then learn your family member and what they need and be your local advocate and contact person, I highly recommend. And of course, senior centers, which again have a varying degree. What we did was try to know all of the resources in the 4-county area that we served so that we could connect people with those services. So, what can you do? You can take care of yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Educate yourself about aging, the illnesses or chronic conditions, and about caregiving. Attend a support group. Learn about local resources. Ask for and accept help. Have a plan and a backup plan and a backup to the backup plan. Reassess often, stay flexible. Watch for signs of burnout, know your limits. No matter how good a job you do, your care recipient will decline. That one is so important because we all try so hard to do this job well. You know, when you raise kids, you're raising kids so that they'll become independent and self-sufficient. They get better at it most of the time. When you're taking care of a parent who's declining, no matter what you do, death will come eventually. So you have to get good with that in your own head. And you have to know what your limits are. You know, like, I'm really good at conversation and I'm really good, I can make a meal, but I do not want to do your toileting. That's where I draw the line, and that's where I need to get help. I'm afraid to do your bathing because I'm afraid I'm going to drop you. You get slippery when wet. That's where I want a professional to come in and help. Okay? So again, resources are your local senior centers, geriatric care managers, home care agencies, the Area Agency on Aging, the internet. There's so much out there. One particular resource I would recommend as a starting point would be the Family Caregiver Alliance. Books, and I brought a couple with me. This is sort of the encyclopedia, How to Care for Aging Parents. And if the person you're caring for has dementia, the 36-hour day is sort of the Bible of care. And this is one that the National Institute on Aging put out. I think it's available online. You can print it out yourself. They don't print them anymore. But it is on long-distance caregiving and gives a lot of guidance to those who are caring for a person who's not in the same community you are. AARP has a lot of resources and a lot of guides for care these days. Most recently, they put out a guide, and that's where I got some of the statistics from, called Home Alone Revisited, Family Caregivers Providing Complex Chronic Care. I think that the average number of chronic conditions for a person over 80 is like 5 to 7. So you're managing a lot of different conditions, and the medications for them often conflict with each other. So you have to make some difficult choices. And I think that's another thing. When we think about being someone's healthcare proxy, we often think about end of life, but there's a lot that goes on in the decade before that, or 5 years before that, where you're managing these, and the person you're caring for is not really capable of making those decisions, because one of the first things that goes is decision-making skills. How do we take care of ourselves? Where do we look for that kind of support? I'm a strong advocate for caregiver support groups. I ran caregiver support groups for 15 years. Just knowing that somebody else is going through the same thing, maybe went through the same thing. One of the main things that my groups told me, I did one for spouses and one for adult children of aging parents, was it was a safe place where we could say anything. So it was a place where you could rail against that parent who will not accept help or who is mean even though you're the only one doing things or whatever. So caregiver support groups is great. And there are now some caregiver support groups online, which I think is wonderful because you can log in at 3 o'clock in the morning and post, because that's the only time that you have available, instead of saying, well, on the third Monday of the month at 4 o'clock, I'm going to go to my support group. I think this is the place where we as Quakers need to look at what our meetings are doing to support folks too. That this is where our care and counsel committees need to know who's caring for a family member who might be experiencing a lot of this stress and sandwich generation stuff, so that we can support them in that journey. It's amazing what just going to lunch with a girlfriend who's good at listening can do. Or if you're a runner, going out for a good run, going out for a good walk, that fitting those things in just pays back ever so much more than the time that you took. So a second thing that I heard in what you said was about what do you do when there are siblings and the siblings don't take an equal amount. So what I've heard and what I've experienced for myself and my clients is it's never equal. So just give up the idea that it's going to be evenly distributed. Sometimes you can distribute things based on distance or skill set. So the brother who is an accountant say, please, will you take care of the bill part? I'll take care of the grocery shopping, I'll take care of the doctor's visits, but this is something you can do without even showing up at the house. Please take care of this. And sometimes they say sure, and sometimes they go, oh, I'm too busy. In terms of getting the person you're caring for to be kinder and acknowledge it, the one success that I'm aware of, or a success story that I've heard in that, is that one of my social workers went out, one of my children of aging parents was just beside herself because her mother was really, really nasty to her. And this woman had given up her life in another state and moved back into the home with mom. And she was just getting all of the stuff that mom felt about not being capable anymore was being vented at this daughter. So the social worker went out and talked with both of them, talked about some services that they could get for respite so that the daughter wasn't there 24/7, and some things like that. But the social worker also read mom the riot act and said, you need to be nicer to her. And hearing it from someone who wasn't in the family made a difference. And she told me that several times. So sometimes having someone say, like, why are you doing this? She's the one who's caring for you. She's the one who's here every day, kind of stopped the cycle. So don't expect it to be equal, and don't be, it can be so toxic to be resentful of what the others are not doing. If you're the one who knows you're not doing as much, there's sometimes things that you can do. Send your sister who's doing all the care money to go on a vacation. Do something that says, I recognize, just the words, I recognize that you are doing things that I could never do, emotionally or physically or whatever. I recognize that you are carrying the majority of this, and I appreciate it. Boy, that goes a long way. So there are all those family dynamics, and it stirs back up all the stuff from childhood. Well, you were always the favorite child. I know one family where it seemed like there was a battle for who was the black sheep in the family because everybody thought they were. But, and the dynamics between parents and children, it does stir all that up. This is a tough journey to go on. But hang in there. Get support for yourself. Find somebody who can prop you up. Those circles of care. I wanted to say that we, in those outer care circles, instead of saying, well, give me a call if you need help, it's a lot more effective to say, can I bring lunch on Friday night? Or dinner on Friday night? Can I take you to lunch on Saturday afternoon? That being specific in what you're offering can also help the person accept that kind of care. So, thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
That's me. And then I'll leave this up as queries that we can discuss or to entertain questions from you.